The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the courtroom quieted to a hush. The old cassette recorder whirred to life, and then came the voice, gravelly, low, worn with time. My father. If anything ever happens to me, the house belongs to Evelyn. She is the only one who ever truly loved me for who I am. My wife and the others will deny this, but I want her to have what is rightfully hers. A pause. Then, this is my final word. The silence that followed was louder than the recording itself. I did not flinch. I kept my chin high. But inside, I felt the walls shift because this moment was everything I had waited for. I turned slightly, just enough to see my mother's face freeze. My sister's hand flew to her mouth. And Jacob, my brother, simply stared at the recorder like it had betrayed him. They never imagined I would fight back. To them, I was Evelyn the failure. Evelyn the disappointment. The one who left home at 25 and never made it big. I was invisible for decades. But I am 58 now, and I came back with the one thing they could not argue with: the truth. This courtroom was not just about money. This was justice. This was memory. This was my father's voice rising from the grave to speak for me. And it would tear their little empire apart. My name is Evelyn Harper. I am 58 years old, and until recently, I was the forgotten daughter. When my father died, I expected grief, not betrayal. My mother, my older brother Jacob, and my sister Lillian made sure I was completely written out of his will. No explanation. No kindness. Just silence. They said I never amounted to anything, so I did not deserve a cent. I was devastated, humiliated, and dismissed. But what they never knew, what they never even thought to check, was that my father left behind something far more powerful than a signature. He left behind his voice. One cassette, buried in a box of his old books. When I heard it, I knew exactly what I had to do. They erased me from the paper. I would carve myself back into history with something much stronger. Now let me take you back to how it all began. I was born the youngest of 3 children in a small town outside Richmond, Virginia. My father, Henry Harper, was a gentleman with a quiet strength, the kind of father who fixed toys without complaint and remembered which books I liked before I could even read the titles myself. My mother, Celeste, on the other hand, was all sharp edges and brittle smiles. She kept her hair immaculate and her opinions sharper. Growing up, it was clear who her favorites were. Jacob, the eldest, was her golden boy, captain of the football team, business school prodigy, always obedient. Lillian was the image of my mother, charming, elegant, the kind of girl who won over neighbors and teachers effortlessly. I, Evelyn, was the quiet one. I loved reading, drawing, asking too many questions. I was awkward where Lillian was graceful. Curious where Jacob was commanding. My father was the only one who really saw me. We spent hours in the garage together, him sanding old furniture, me sketching by his side. He once told me I had an old soul, like his mother. When I was 10, he gave me her silver locket, and I never took it off. By the time I turned 18, I knew I needed to leave. My mother had a way of cutting you down without ever raising her voice. Every time I failed a test or stumbled in public, I could feel her disappointment soak into the walls of the house. I got into a small liberal arts college in North Carolina and left home with 2 suitcases and a scholarship. Over the next 30 years, I built a modest but fulfilling life. I taught art history at a local community college, lived in a rented cottage filled with books and houseplants, and kept in touch with my father by letter and the occasional weekend visit. My relationship with the rest of the family remained distant, strained by years of quiet dismissal. I never married, and my mother made sure to remind me of that every Christmas. Still alone, she would ask, eyes gleaming with superiority. Well, I suppose not everyone is meant for partnership. Father always tried to soften her remarks, but I knew better than to expect kindness from her. As for Jacob and Lillian, they were busy climbing the social ladder, Jacob as a financial planner, Lillian as a real estate agent married to a local judge. Both successful, both deeply invested in appearances. The last time I saw my father was 6 months before he passed. He looked tired but smiled easily when I arrived. We spent the weekend sorting through his old records and photo albums. At one point, he handed me a small box of cassettes. I kept these for myself. Ramblings mostly. "You know me," he said with a wink. I hugged him tightly when I left that Sunday. I never imagined it would be the last time. When the call came that he had died in his sleep, I was numb. I drove home, dressed in black, and stood quietly during the service. I expected grief. What I did not expect was how quickly everything turned cold. After the funeral, we gathered in my parents' living room. The family lawyer, an old friend of my father's, read the will aloud. My name was never mentioned. Not once. The house, the savings, even my father's record collection, all of it went to Celeste, Jacob, and Lillian. I sat on the couch, stunned, my locket suddenly heavy around my neck. When I asked if there had been a mistake, my mother gave me a pitying smile. "Henry thought it best," she said. "He always worried about you, Evelyn. You were never settled." Jacob chimed in with a shrug. "It is nothing personal. You have your life, we have ours." And Lillian, ever the diplomat, added, "You know Daddy always wanted what was fair." Fair. That word clanged inside my skull like a warning bell. I left the house in a daze. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I pulled away. The man who had whispered bedtime stories to me, who had saved every birthday card I made him, had left me nothing. Or so they claimed. Back home, I opened the box of cassettes he had given me. Most were labeled by date or title. But one stood out, no label, just a strip of tape across the front. I almost skipped it, but something pulled me to it. I dug out my old cassette player, popped in the tape, and pressed play. The voice that emerged was raspy but familiar. My father. He was speaking slowly, deliberately. "If anything happens to me, this is for Evelyn. I know they will try to cut her out, say she was never there. But I want her to know I saw her. I always saw her. This house is hers. And I want her to have what she deserves." My chest tightened. I hit pause. Then play again. There was no mistaking it. My father had recorded a verbal will. And while it might not have been formal, it was real. It was something. And suddenly, so was my grief. It hardened into something sharper. Not rage. Resolve. They erased me on paper. But I had his voice. And I would make sure the world heard it. I brought the cassette to a local attorney I trusted, Darlene Wexler, a meticulous woman in her late 50s with a reputation for being as tenacious as she was discreet. We had worked on a nonprofit committee years ago, and I knew she handled probate cases with care. I played her the tape. She leaned forward, elbows on her desk, listening closely. When it ended, she let out a slow breath. "This is not nothing," she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "A verbal testament recorded in private will not automatically override the written will. But if we can establish undue influence, this becomes powerful evidence." I blinked. "Undue influence?" She nodded. "It happens more than you think. A vulnerable man in declining health, surrounded by family members who stand to benefit from his silence. If he was pressured or manipulated. Evelyn, this could be the key to unraveling everything." The word unraveling clung to me like morning fog. The next week, we filed an official motion to contest the will. Within days, the response from Jacob's attorney arrived, icy and dismissive, accusing me of clinging to false hope and seeking attention. But I knew better. I knew my father. That recording had not been a whim. It was a lifeline. A court hearing was scheduled for early spring. In the meantime, Darlene began quietly collecting depositions from my father's friends, neighbors, even the hospice nurse who visited him in his final weeks. One thread appeared again and again, how strangely distant the rest of the family had become. How Celeste often refused visitors. How Jacob had taken control of the bank accounts. How my father had seemed confused, frustrated, even scared toward the end. At night, I listened to that tape again and again. His voice, soft and weary, spoke to me across the silence. I started noticing things I had missed at first, how he paused before saying they, how his tone shifted when he said my name. It was more than love. It was a warning. And yet, the response from my family was as ruthless as it was swift. First came the phone calls. "You are making a fool of yourself," Celeste hissed into the receiver. "This is not what your father wanted." Then the messages from Lillian, carefully worded but deeply condescending. "Please let this go, Evelyn. You know how fragile Mother is right now." And then Jacob. He called once. Just once. He said, "I always knew you would come crawling for scraps." The line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone, feeling something inside me split. It was not just about money. It was about being erased. About decades of being treated as background noise in a family that only valued what it could control. That night, I opened the attic and pulled out an old box of photo albums. In the third one, I found a picture from when I was 12 sitting beside my father in the garage, both of us covered in sawdust, smiling. Behind us, nailed to the wall, was a small corkboard. And pinned to that board, a photo of my father's grandmother wearing the same silver locket I wore around my neck. I turned the photograph over. In his handwriting, he had written, "To Evelyn. Everything she deserves. Everything." They could have it all, the big house, the cars, the inheritance. But I had the truth. And the truth had weight. Enough to tip a courtroom. Or crush a legacy. I looked in the mirror that night, the lines around my eyes deeper than I remembered. I was 59 years old. And I was done being invisible. The hearing was 2 weeks away. I was ready to be seen. 2 weeks later, I walked into the courtroom in a pressed gray suit and a navy scarf my father once gave me for my birthday. My hands trembled slightly as I took my seat beside Darlene, but my face remained still. Across the aisle sat Jacob in a tailored jacket, Lillian in pearls, and Celeste in muted black. All three looked like they had just come from brunch at the country club. The judge was a woman named Honorable Ruth McConnell, sharp-eyed and known for her no-nonsense demeanor. She opened the session with a review of the will. The estate had been left in full to my mother, with Jacob and Lillian listed as executors. There was no mention of me, not even a footnote. Darlene stood calmly and played the audio recording. The courtroom shifted as my father's voice filled the space. Every word cracked through the silence like a bell. I watched the expressions change on their faces, a tightening of the jaw, a glance exchanged, a hand gripping the side of a chair. When the tape ended, Jacob laughed quietly and leaned over to his attorney. But the judge held up her hand. "This recording is admissible. I want both counsels to submit supplementary documents by the end of the week." Outside the courtroom, the media had begun to sniff around. An anonymous leak, which I was not entirely uninvolved in, had sparked local coverage. The headline read, "Heiress cut out of will fights back with secret recording." From that day on, I was no longer invisible. 2 mornings later, I woke up to see my name on a blog post titled "Estranged Daughter Launches Greedy Lawsuit Against Aging Mother." The article painted me as unstable, bitter, and opportunistic. It quoted family friends who said I had been distant for years and never cared for my parents. The comments below were worse, strangers calling me heartless, accusing me of trying to take advantage of a grieving widow. I knew exactly who had fed the story to the press. Jacob and Lillian had always been good at rewriting reality. They had done it for years within our family, gaslighting me into believing I was the problem. They were trying to do it again, only louder. But I was not the same person I had been. I met with Darlene every day that week. We built our case meticulously, documenting financial inconsistencies, digging into changes made to the will after my father had been hospitalized, and even tracking a large bank transfer from the estate account to Jacob's private investment portfolio. Then, just when I thought the worst had passed, I received a call from my mother. It was brief. "I wish I had never given birth to you." The line went silent. And with it, something inside me snapped. That was the moment I stopped fighting for inclusion. I started fighting for truth. A week before the next court date, Darlene received a letter. It was unsigned but postmarked locally. Inside was a single-page typed statement. The author claimed to be a former caregiver hired to assist my father in his final month. They wrote that Celeste had explicitly forbidden the man from using the phone or contacting any relatives without her permission, including me. They claimed she had ordered him to destroy personal items, including letters and journals. One line stood out. "I overheard a conversation where your mother said, 'No one will ever know what he really wanted.'" We wrote the ending. It was damning. We filed it as an anonymous witness submission. That night, I received a message request on Facebook from someone named Elise Norton. She wrote, "I think I have something you need to hear." I met her the next day. She was in her 60s, gray-haired and lean, and had been my father's private accountant for over 15 years. When I walked into the coffee shop, she slid a thumb drive across the table. "I always kept a copy of my client's audio memos," she said. "Your father left me one the month before he died. I never deleted it. I figured one day, someone might need it." The clip was short, just under a minute. But it was enough. "I know Evelyn will be the only one who understands what I built. I wish she could be here. I am afraid they are keeping her away. If anything happens, I hope this is heard." This time I wept. Not out of sorrow, out of resolve. I arrived at court that morning in a quiet storm. My hair was pulled back in a simple twist, no makeup but lipstick, a shade my father used to say reminded him of ripe cherries in summer. The courtroom was nearly full. Reporters sat in the back row scribbling. Celeste wore all navy and pearls again, like armor. Jacob scrolled on his phone. Lillian adjusted her scarf and avoided my eyes. Darlene began by submitting the anonymous caregiver's letter into evidence. The judge read it slowly, silently, her brow furrowing with each paragraph. Then Darlene stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence, a first-hand account from a long-serving financial advisor to the late Mr. James Alden." The room seemed to still as Darlene plugged in a small speaker and pressed play. My father's voice filled the chamber again. This time softer, more vulnerable. "I know Evelyn will be the only one who understands what I built. I wish she could be here. I am afraid they are keeping her away. If anything happens, I hope this is heard." That was it. Just under 60 seconds. But it changed everything. Celeste gasped. Jacob sat upright. Lillian turned pale. Darlene did not gloat. She simply nodded toward the judge. Honorable McConnell called for recess. When she returned 20 minutes later, she was holding 2 folders, one blue, one red. Her voice was measured, calm, but carried enough weight to crush the bones of the room. "It is my opinion that Evelyn Alden was intentionally excluded from communication and decision-making regarding her father's estate. Based on submitted recordings, witness statements, and financial documentation, I find evidence of undue influence and possible fraud." Jacob sputtered something under his breath. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Alden, this court will be issuing a formal review of your activities as executor. You are hereby removed from your role. Pending criminal investigation." He looked like someone had struck him in the chest. Celeste stood. "This is absurd. You are not to address the court unless asked." The judge's tone silenced the room. "I am awarding Evelyn Alden full executor status. Furthermore, due to evidence of will tampering, the original document drafted in March of last year, prior to any decline in Mr. Alden's health, will be reinstated." I already knew what that version said. It named me the sole heir. Celeste sat down so suddenly I thought she might faint. Lillian began to cry quietly. Jacob stood and stormed out of the courtroom, his face red and shaking. I remained still. When the judge adjourned, I stood and faced the gallery. "I will ensure this estate honors my father's real wishes," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "No more lies." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Someone shouted a question about whether I planned to press charges. I looked into the lens and said, "Truth does not need to shout." But it never forgets. That evening, I unlocked the safe in my father's old study, a room sealed until now. Inside were several items, but one caught my eye first. A photo of him and me, from when I was 6. We stood in a sunflower field, my arms around his neck. On the back, in his neat, spidery script, were 4 words. "Always my brightest girl." I closed the safe and exhaled. Justice was not loud. It was enduring. And it was mine. A year has passed since the courtroom doors closed behind me and left the chaos of that trial in the past. Time, I have learned, is not the healer people claim it to be. It does not erase betrayal or soften its sting. But it does give space for truth to root itself, to stretch and strengthen. I now live in my father's country home, the one he bought as a young man when dreams still mattered more than money. The air smells of pine and dried hay. On warm days, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the world breathe. The estate is stable now. The fraudulent loans Jacob took out have been closed and accounted for. The foundation my father once imagined to support underprivileged students interested in engineering and architecture is now fully funded and active. It bears his name, not mine. That feels right. Celeste was forced to step down from several social clubs after her involvement went public. Lillian moved out of state and has not spoken to anyone since. Jacob pled guilty to financial misconduct in exchange for a reduced sentence. I did not attend the hearing. There was nothing left to say. Sometimes I wonder if they ever think about what they did. If, in quiet hours, they regret. But I no longer carry their guilt. Instead, I have surrounded myself with people who speak truth gently and love fiercely. I volunteer twice a week at the same high school where I was once mocked. Not for attention or absolution. Simply because I know how it feels to be unseen. There are moments, late at night, when I replay my father's voice in my mind. His gentle cadence. The way he paused when he said my name, as if it meant more than breath. He knew. He always knew. And now the world knows too. You see, revenge is not always fire and fury. Sometimes it is quiet. It is justice served in stillness. It is reclaiming what was stolen without losing who you are. So to anyone watching, to anyone who has ever been told they are not enough, let me ask, what would you do if the truth no one believed in finally became the only thing that mattered? Because that was the moment I stopped surviving and began living.